There's nothing quite like discovering that everything you believed about success was built on a foundation of ignorance. For Victoria Hartwell, CEO of Pinnacle Education Systems, that moment came when she went undercover at Riverside Elementary and witnessed a single father turn what should have been a disaster into the most profound lesson in leadership she'd ever experienced. What she saw that Tuesday afternoon would force her to question not just her business philosophy, but everything she thought she knew about what it means to truly succeed in life. But before we dive into this incredible story of transformation, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if this resonates with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I have something even more powerful waiting for you. Victoria Hartwell had built her empire on data, metrics, and the cold logic of corporate efficiency. At 38, she was the youngest female CEO in the education technology sector, commanding a fortune worth over $200 million. Her company, Pinnacle Education Systems, had revolutionized how schools managed everything from enrollment to parent communications, streamlining processes that had been messy and human into clean, profitable algorithms. From her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Portland, Victoria could see the entire city spread out beneath her like a well-organized spreadsheet. Every building, every street, every life reduced to data points in the grand equation of urban planning. It was exactly how she preferred to see the world: quantifiable, manageable, controllable. Her assistant, Rebecca, knocked softly before entering with the quarterly education sector reports. "The undercover school visits are scheduled to begin next week," Rebecca announced, setting the thick folders on Victoria's glass desk. "The board wants first-hand assessment of how our systems are actually being implemented in real classroom environments." Victoria nodded without looking up from her laptop. The undercover visits were a necessary evil, a way to gather authentic data about their products without the artificial performance that accompanied official corporate inspections. She'd done them before at high schools and middle schools, always finding exactly what she expected: overworked administrators grateful for technology that simplified their jobs, teachers who appreciated streamlined communication systems, and students who barely noticed the digital infrastructure that organized their academic lives. "I've selected Riverside Elementary in the Ashford district," Rebecca continued. "It's one of our newer implementations, serving a diverse socioeconomic population. The principal, Dr. Amanda Foster, has no idea you'll be observing. You'll be introduced as an educational consultant conducting routine system evaluations." Riverside Elementary. Victoria had reviewed their contract 6 months ago. A struggling school in a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place where her systems could demonstrate real impact by bringing order to chaos. The school served 400 students, 60% of whom qualified for free lunch programs, with a significant population of single-parent households struggling to navigate the complexities of modern education. Perfect for her purposes. Victoria had always believed that struggling schools failed because they lacked proper systems and accountability. Her technology eliminated the human errors that plagued inefficient institutions: missed parent conferences, lost permission slips, unclear communication between home and school. When everything was digital, tracked, and automated, performance naturally improved. It was simple mathematics. What she didn't expect was to have her fundamental beliefs about human nature challenged by a single father whose approach to parenting would reveal the profound limitations of her data-driven worldview. The morning of her first undercover visit, Victoria dressed carefully in business casual attire that would blend in with the educational consultant persona Rebecca had crafted. Her silver BMW pulled into the visitor parking space at Riverside Elementary at exactly 8:15 a.m., 15 minutes before the official start of observations. The school building was older than she'd expected. Red brick with cheerful yellow accents and hand-painted murals covering sections of exterior walls. Children's artwork decorated every available window, creating a riot of color that seemed almost chaotic compared to the sleek minimalism of corporate environments Victoria was accustomed to. Inside, the hallways buzzed with the controlled chaos of morning arrival. Hundreds of small voices created a symphony of excitement, anxiety, and boundless energy that no algorithm could fully capture. Victoria found herself oddly fascinated by the organic flow of human interaction. Teachers greeting students by name, children hugging friends they hadn't seen since yesterday, parents dropping off forgotten lunchboxes with expressions of exasperated affection. Dr. Amanda Foster met Victoria in the main office, a warm woman in her 50s whose enthusiasm for education was immediately apparent. "Ms. Hartwell, welcome to Riverside Elementary," she said, using the false identity Rebecca had created. "We're excited to show you how the Pinnacle systems have integrated into our daily operations." As they began the tour, Victoria mentally cataloged the ways her technology had improved the school's efficiency. Digital check-in systems eliminated the chaos of traditional sign-in sheets. Automated parent communication reduced the administrative burden on teachers. Real-time attendance tracking provided instant data about student engagement patterns. Everything was working exactly as designed. But then they reached the third-grade hallway, and Victoria encountered something that would fundamentally challenge everything she thought she understood about the relationship between systems and success, between efficiency and effectiveness, between managing people and actually leading them. It started with the sound of gentle laughter coming from classroom 3B, where a parent-teacher conference was taking place behind partially closed doors. What Victoria overheard in that conversation would begin a journey of discovery that would transform not just her business philosophy, but her entire understanding of what it truly means to create positive change in the world. The single father's voice carried a warmth and wisdom that no corporate training program had ever taught her, and his approach to solving his daughter's challenges would reveal leadership principles that Victoria had never encountered in any boardroom or business school. Tomorrow she would return to her corner office a completely different person than the one who had walked into Riverside Elementary that morning. But first, she had to witness a masterclass in human connection that would shatter every assumption she'd built her fortune upon. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. To understand why what happened at Riverside Elementary hit Victoria Hartwell so hard, you need to know who she was before that Tuesday morning shattered everything she believed about leadership and success. Victoria hadn't been born into wealth or privilege. She'd grown up in a cramped apartment above her grandmother's corner store in East Cleveland, where efficiency wasn't a business philosophy, it was survival. Her mother, Patricia, worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after Victoria's father disappeared when she was 7. There was no time for emotional conversations or gentle parenting. Every minute had to count. Every action had to serve a purpose. Every problem needed a quick, practical solution. "Feelings don't pay the rent, Victoria," her mother would say whenever young Victoria complained about something unfair at school or cried about missing her father. "Figure out what needs to be done and do it. Everything else is just noise." That became Victoria's operating system. By age 12, Victoria was managing the inventory spreadsheets for her grandmother's store, creating systems to track which products sold fastest and which suppliers offered the best margins. She found comfort in numbers. They didn't lie, didn't leave, didn't make promises they couldn't keep. Mathematics was reliable in a way that people simply weren't. Her academic brilliance earned her a full scholarship to Northwestern University, where she studied business administration with a focus on organizational psychology. While her classmates partied or explored their identities, Victoria worked 20 hours a week at a tutoring center and spent her free time developing efficiency models for local businesses. She graduated summa cum laude at 21, with 3 job offers from Fortune 500 companies. But Victoria had bigger plans. She'd noticed something during her college years. Schools were drowning in administrative chaos. Parent-teacher conferences, scheduled on scraps of paper, attendance records kept in outdated ledgers, communication gaps that left families frustrated and teachers overwhelmed. The education sector was decades behind in adopting the systematic approaches that had revolutionized other industries. Victoria saw opportunity where others saw complexity. Using her signing bonus from McKinsey & Company as seed money, she started Pinnacle Education Systems in her studio apartment, working 18-hour days to develop software that would bring order to the beautiful chaos of school administration. Her first product was a simple parent communication platform that eliminated the phone tag between teachers and families. The results were immediate and measurable. Schools using Victoria's system saw a 40% increase in parent engagement, a 25% reduction in administrative overhead, and significantly improved student outcomes. Within 3 years, Pinnacle was serving over 200 schools across the Midwest. Victoria's approach was revolutionary because it was so beautifully logical. Every interaction between parents, students, and educators could be optimized through better systems. Every problem could be solved through clearer data and more efficient processes. Human nature, she believed, was simply a variable to be managed through superior organization. Her success wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. Every streamlined system was proof that she'd transcended the chaos of her childhood. Every efficiency improvement validated her mother's harsh lessons about practical solutions over emotional responses. Every school that adopted her technology was evidence that her worldview wasn't just profitable, it was genuinely helpful. Victoria's personal life reflected the same systematic approach. She'd married Jonathan, a fellow Northwestern graduate, who shared her appreciation for order and ambition. Their relationship operated on clearly defined roles and expectations. He managed their investment portfolio and social calendar. She handled career advancement and household logistics. They communicated through shared digital calendars and quarterly relationship assessments, where they evaluated goals and adjusted strategies. It was efficient, harmonious, and completely devoid of the messy emotional drama that had defined Victoria's childhood. They divorced amicably after 4 years when Jonathan received a job offer in Singapore that didn't align with Victoria's 5-year business plan. No hard feelings, just incompatible strategic directions. Victoria threw herself even deeper into work after the divorce. Pinnacle expanded nationally, then internationally. She hired the best minds in educational technology, acquired 3 smaller competitors, and built a company culture based on data-driven decision-making and continuous optimization. Her office became her sanctuary: clean lines, minimal decoration, everything designed for maximum productivity. The corner office on the 42nd floor wasn't just a symbol of success, it was proof that systematic thinking could overcome any obstacle. From those windows, Victoria could see the entire Portland metropolitan area, millions of people going about their daily lives with varying degrees of efficiency and purpose. Most of them, she believed, would benefit from better systems, clearer processes, more logical approaches to solving their problems. She particularly felt this way about schools serving low-income communities. These were the places where her own childhood had taught her that disorder equals suffering. When families struggled with poverty, unemployment, and instability, the last thing they needed was additional chaos from poorly organized educational institutions. Victoria genuinely believed her technology could break cycles of generational disadvantage by bringing systematic excellence to the schools that needed it most. Her team at Pinnacle shared this mission-driven approach. They weren't just building software. They were creating tools that could level the playing field for disadvantaged students. Every algorithm they refined, every user interface they improved, every efficiency gain they achieved represented real progress toward educational equity. Victoria's annual visits to client schools always confirmed her theories. Administrators praised the reduction in paperwork. Teachers appreciated clearer communication channels. Parents seemed more engaged when they could access information through user-friendly apps rather than navigating complex phone trees or waiting for callbacks. The data always supported her approach. User satisfaction scores averaged 4.7 out of 5. Schools reported measurable improvements in virtually every metric Pinnacle tracked. Victoria's systems worked exactly as designed, delivering exactly the outcomes she'd promised to exactly the communities that needed them most. Which is why what she witnessed at Riverside Elementary hit her like a seismic shift in reality itself. Because sometimes, being completely right about the numbers means being completely wrong about what actually matters. The meeting that would change everything started as a routine parent-teacher conference that Victoria happened to overhear while observing the digital check-in systems outside classroom 3B. She was taking notes on user interface efficiency when Dr. Foster mentioned they should observe how well the communication platform was facilitating parent engagement. Through the partially open door, Victoria could see a man in his early 30s sitting across from Mrs. Rachel Thompson, a veteran third-grade teacher. The man wore a simple blue button-down shirt and jeans, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd rushed from work. But what struck Victoria immediately was his posture, completely relaxed and attentive, leaning forward slightly with the kind of focused presence she rarely saw in corporate boardrooms. "Mr. Daniel Rivers," Mrs. Thompson was saying, consulting her tablet. "I'm so glad you could make it today. I wanted to discuss Emma's recent struggles with our new math curriculum." Victoria's attention sharpened. This was exactly the kind of situation her systems were designed to address. communication between home and school about academic challenges. She positioned herself where she could observe the interaction while appearing to review attendance data on her own device. "Emma's been coming home really frustrated," Daniel said, his voice carrying genuine concern without defensiveness. "She keeps saying she's stupid at math, which breaks my heart because I know how brilliant she is. What are you seeing in the classroom?" Mrs. Thompson pulled up Emma's performance data on her tablet, all tracked through Victoria's educational platform. Her test scores have dropped from A's to C's since we implemented the new Common Core aligned curriculum 3 weeks ago. She seems anxious during math time and has started asking to use the bathroom frequently during lessons, which usually indicates stress. Victoria nodded mentally. This was textbook educational consulting. Identify the problem through data, analyze the performance metrics, develop a systematic intervention. She expected Daniel to ask about tutoring options or additional practice worksheets, the standard parental responses to academic struggles. Instead, Daniel asked something that caught her completely off guard. "Can you tell me about a moment when Emma seemed confident and engaged recently?" "Any subject, any situation. I want to understand what conditions help her thrive before we talk about what's not working." Victoria paused her note-taking. In 15 years of educational consulting, she'd never heard a parent begin a problem-solving conversation by focusing on strengths rather than deficits. The approach seemed backwards. Shouldn't they analyze the failure first to understand its root causes? Mrs. Thompson's expression brightened immediately. "Actually, yes. Yesterday during our science unit on ecosystems, Emma created the most incredible presentation about how bees communicate through dancing. She got so excited that she asked if she could teach the other students the waggle dance. She had the entire class buzzing around the classroom, no pun intended, and explaining complex concepts about distance and direction." "That's my Emma," Daniel smiled, and Victoria noticed how his whole face transformed with pride. She's always been fascinated by how things connect to each other. At home, she creates these elaborate stories where every character has a specific role in solving problems together. The bee dance presentation was remarkable because she had to use spatial reasoning, pattern recognition, and mathematical concepts to explain how bees communicate distances and angles, Mrs. Thompson continued. She was doing advanced mathematical thinking without realizing it. Victoria found herself genuinely intrigued despite her skepticism. The conversation had taken an unexpected turn from problem analysis to strength identification, but she couldn't see how this approach would address Emma's declining test scores. Daniel leaned back thoughtfully. "So Emma thrives when learning feels like discovery, and when she can see how concepts connect to bigger systems. The math curriculum struggle started when we shifted from story-based word problems to abstract computational practice," Mrs. Thompson realized, her voice carrying a note of discovery. "The new curriculum focuses heavily on procedural fluency, memorizing algorithms and practicing calculation speed. Which is the opposite of how Emma's mind works," Daniel concluded. "She needs to understand the why before the how makes sense to her." Victoria watched in fascination as Daniel's approach revealed insights that weren't captured in any of her system's data points. Her platform tracked test scores, assignment completion, and behavioral incidents, but it couldn't measure learning style compatibility or emotional engagement patterns. "What if we tried something?" Daniel suggested. "What if Emma's math practice at home focused on real-world applications that connect to her interests? Calculating pollination rates, measuring garden plots for optimal bee habitat, using geometry to design more efficient honeycomb patterns." Mrs. Thompson was already taking notes enthusiastically. "We could absolutely modify her assignments to include more contextual problems. The curriculum standards don't specify how students demonstrate mastery, just that they master the concepts. And maybe she could present her discoveries to the class once a week. Emma loves teaching others, and explaining mathematical concepts to her peers would reinforce her own learning while building confidence." Victoria realized she was witnessing something that challenged every assumption she'd built her career upon. Daniel wasn't trying to fix his daughter to fit the system. He was collaborating with the teacher to adapt the system to leverage his daughter's natural strengths. "There's one more thing," Daniel added, his tone becoming more serious. "Emma's been having nightmares about being stupid. Math anxiety can create lasting negative associations with learning if we don't address the emotional component alongside the academic piece." "What do you suggest?" Mrs. Thompson asked. "What if we celebrated her current mathematical thinking instead of focusing on what she can't do yet? Every time she makes a connection or asks a question that shows deep thinking, we acknowledge that as mathematical success, even if she hasn't mastered the computational piece. Victoria felt something uncomfortable stirring in her chest. Daniel's approach was addressing Emma's emotional needs as inseparable from her academic needs, a holistic perspective that her data-driven systems couldn't capture or support. "I love this approach," Mrs. Thompson said, "and I think it would benefit other students too. Would you be willing to come in as a parent volunteer to help develop these real-world math applications?" "Absolutely." Emma and I could create a whole series of bee-themed math challenges for the class. As the conference concluded with specific plans and timelines, Victoria realized she'd just witnessed the most effective educational intervention she'd ever observed, and none of it could have been generated by her technology platforms. Daniel Rivers had diagnosed his daughter's challenges, identified solutions, and developed implementation strategies, using nothing more than deep knowledge of his child, creative problem-solving, and collaborative partnership with her teacher. Most unsettling of all, his approach was already showing results that her systems would never be able to measure: the restoration of a child's confidence and love of learning. Victoria left that hallway with more questions than answers, and a growing suspicion that everything she'd built her fortune upon might be solving the wrong problems entirely. Victoria spent the rest of that Tuesday observing other parent interactions through her Pinnacle systems, but her mind kept returning to Daniel Rivers and his unconventional approach to his daughter's struggles. She told herself it was an interesting anomaly, one creative parent who happened to think outside traditional frameworks. Her data from hundreds of other schools still supported her systematic approach to educational challenges. But over the following weeks, as Victoria continued her undercover observations at Riverside Elementary, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The more she watched Daniel interact with the school community, the more she realized her technology was capturing metrics while missing the actual mechanisms that created positive change. It started small. Victoria noticed Daniel arriving 15 minutes early for pickup every day, not rushing to collect Emma and leave, but engaging with other parents and teachers in the schoolyard. Through her observational notes, she documented these interactions with growing bewilderment. On Wednesday, she watched Daniel spend 20 minutes helping another single mother, Carmen Martinez, navigate the online parent portal that was part of Victoria's communication platform. Carmen's English was limited, and the system's interface, designed for efficiency, assumed a level of digital literacy and language comprehension that Carmen didn't possess. Instead of simply helping Carmen access her son's grades, Daniel sat with her on the playground bench and walked through each section of the portal, explaining not just what the information meant, but why it mattered for understanding her son Miguel's educational progress. He'd even created a handwritten translation guide for the most common platform terminology. Victoria realized with uncomfortable clarity that her user-friendly system was creating barriers for exactly the families it was supposed to serve. The efficiency gains her technology provided to administrators were being offset by the additional burden placed on parents who lacked the cultural and technological fluency her design team had assumed. Thursday brought another revelation. Victoria observed Daniel volunteering in the school library during his lunch break, reading with struggling readers. But his approach was unlike anything she'd seen in educational intervention programs. Instead of focusing on phonics drills or comprehension worksheets, Daniel would sit with each child and ask them to tell him a story about anything they were curious about. Then, together, they would find books related to that interest. A boy fascinated by dinosaurs would practice reading paleontology picture books. A girl who loved dancing would read biographies of famous performers. The children's reading scores, tracked meticulously by Victoria's assessment platform, showed measurable improvement. But what the data couldn't capture was the transformation in their relationship with reading itself. These weren't students completing required exercises. They were young people discovering that books could unlock worlds directly connected to their passions. Victoria's systems measured reading level progress and time-on-task metrics. They completely missed the fact that Daniel was teaching children to see reading as a tool for exploring their own curiosity, rather than a skill to be endured. By Friday, Victoria had documented enough anomalies to recognize a fundamental flaw in her understanding of educational effectiveness. Her technology optimized for measurable outcomes, test scores, completion rates, communication frequency. Daniel operated from an entirely different framework that prioritized relationships, individual strengths, and intrinsic motivation. The breaking point came during a parent-teacher conference she observed between Daniel and Mr. James Walsh, a fifth-grade teacher known for his strict adherence to curriculum standards. Emma had been moved to advanced math after the previous week's intervention, but she was struggling with the social dynamics in her new classroom. Emma's academically ready for fifth-grade math concepts, Mr. Walsh explained, reviewing performance data on his tablet. But she's having difficulty integrating with the older students. They see her as a baby, and she's become withdrawn during group work sessions. Victoria expected Daniel to request additional support services or ask about moving Emma back to third grade, the kind of systematic solutions her platforms were designed to facilitate. Instead, Daniel asked, "What does Emma do during recess?" Mr. Walsh looked puzzled. "Recess? She usually sits alone reading or drawing." Why does that matter for her math placement? Because Emma's challenge isn't academic, it's social. She needs to build relationships with these older students outside of the academic context, where the age difference feels most pronounced. Daniel paused, clearly thinking through possibilities. What if Emma became the class expert on something the fifth graders actually need help with? Something where her knowledge would make her valuable to the older students rather than just younger and different? Like what? Emma knows more about technology troubleshooting than most adults. All those hours watching me fix computers at home. What if she became the classroom tech assistant? The fifth graders could ask her for help with digital projects, and she'd be contributing her expertise rather than trying to catch up socially. Victoria watched Mr. Walsh's expression shift from skepticism to genuine interest. That could actually work. We have ongoing issues with students struggling to use the presentation software for their projects. And Emma loves teaching. She could create tutorial videos that other students could access when they need help. It positions her as a resource rather than a burden. Within 30 minutes, Daniel and Mr. Walsh had developed a plan that addressed Emma's social integration challenges while leveraging her technological strengths. Emma would spend one afternoon a week creating digital tutorials for her classmates, building relationships through expertise sharing rather than age-based compatibility. Victoria realized she was witnessing a masterclass in systems thinking that operated on completely different principles than her technological approach. Daniel didn't solve problems by optimizing existing structures. He reimagined the relationships within those structures to create entirely new possibilities. Most troubling of all, Daniel's solutions consistently produced better outcomes than the systematic interventions her platforms recommended. His approach required no additional funding, no new policies, no administrative oversight. Just creative thinking about how to leverage existing resources and relationships more effectively. That evening, Victoria sat in her hotel room reviewing her observation notes, trying to understand what she'd witnessed. Her entire career had been built on the premise that better systems create better outcomes, but Daniel Rivers was achieving superior results through what appeared to be intuitive relationship management and creative problem-solving. She found herself questioning not just her technology, but the fundamental assumptions that had driven her success. What if efficiency wasn't the highest value in education? What if the messy, time-intensive work of understanding individual needs and building authentic relationships was actually more effective than streamlined systematic approaches? Victoria had come to Riverside Elementary to validate her company's impact on struggling schools. Instead, she'd discovered a single parent whose approach to challenges was revolutionizing her understanding of what educational leadership actually looked like. And the most unsettling realization of all was that Daniel's methods worked precisely because they couldn't be systematized, measured, or replicated through technology. They required the kind of human insight and creative adaptation that her platforms were designed to eliminate. For the first time in her career, Victoria Hartwell began to wonder if her greatest professional achievement might actually be her greatest professional mistake. The moment that would shatter Victoria's worldview completely came 3 weeks into her observations, during what should have been a routine school crisis that her emergency communication systems were designed to handle flawlessly. It was a rainy Thursday morning when 8-year-old Marcus Johnson didn't show up for school. In Victoria's systematic world, this was a straightforward attendance issue. The automated system would send notifications to parents, flag the absence for administrative follow-up, and generate the appropriate documentation for truancy tracking. Clean, efficient, and properly documented. But at Riverside Elementary, Marcus's absence triggered something Victoria had never seen before. Mrs. Thompson noticed Marcus's empty desk during morning attendance and immediately felt concerned. Marcus had perfect attendance. He loved school and never missed unless he was seriously ill. More importantly, his mother Elena worked double shifts at the textile factory and relied on the school's breakfast program to ensure Marcus ate properly before classes began. Instead of simply marking Marcus absent in Victoria's digital system, Mrs. Thompson walked to the main office to speak with Dr. Foster directly. "Something's wrong," Mrs. Thompson told the principal. "Marcus has never missed school without Elena calling ahead. And yesterday he seemed worried about something but wouldn't tell me what." Dr. Foster immediately tried calling Elena's number, but it went straight to voicemail. In Victoria's systematic approach, this would trigger the next level of automated escalation, a formal absence inquiry sent through the parent portal with a 24-hour response requirement. Instead, Dr. Foster did something that made Victoria question everything she thought she knew about effective school administration. She called Daniel Rivers. Victoria watched in fascination as Dr. Foster explained the situation to Daniel over the phone. "Marcus and Emma are close friends, and you know the neighborhood better than anyone. Could you drive by the Johnson apartment during your lunch break, just to make sure everything's okay?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Of course. Give me the address." Victoria found herself following Daniel's car 20 minutes later as he drove to the Riverside Apartments, a complex of modest units that housed many of Riverside Elementary's families. She told herself she was conducting observational research, but truthfully, she was completely baffled by the response to Marcus's absence. What she witnessed next would haunt her for months. Daniel knocked on the apartment door and waited. When no one answered, he walked around to the back of the building and peered through a window. Victoria saw his expression change immediately, from casual concern to urgent alarm. Daniel called Dr. Foster while simultaneously dialing 911. "We need an ambulance at 847 Riverside Apartments, Unit 12B. Elena Johnson is unconscious on the kitchen floor, and I can see Marcus sitting beside her crying." The next 30 minutes unfolded like a perfectly choreographed emergency response, except none of it appeared in any crisis management protocol Victoria had ever designed. While paramedics attended to Elena, who had collapsed from diabetic shock after working a 16-hour shift without proper meals, Daniel sat with Marcus in the ambulance, holding the terrified boy while explaining what was happening in age-appropriate terms. "Your mom is going to be okay," Daniel said calmly. "The doctors know exactly how to help her feel better, but she needs to stay in the hospital for a day or two while they make sure her medicine is working right." "Where will I stay?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Well," Daniel said, looking at Dr. Foster, who had arrived at the scene, "I was thinking you might like to have a sleepover at our house until your mom comes home. Emma would love to have her best friend stay over, and I make pretty good pancakes for breakfast." Victoria watched this exchange with growing amazement. There had been no formal emergency placement procedures, no child services involvement, no institutional protocols. Just a community of people who knew each other well enough to respond to crisis with immediate, practical support. But the real revelation came when they arrived at the hospital. Elena Johnson was conscious but weak. Her blood sugar stabilized, but her face etched with the kind of worry that Victoria recognized from her own childhood, the terror of a single parent whose economic survival balanced on a knife's edge. "I can't afford to miss work," Elena whispered to Dr. Foster. "If I don't show up tonight, they'll replace me. And Marcus, I can't pay for childcare while I'm here." Daniel pulled up a chair beside Elena's hospital bed. "Elena, you don't need to worry about any of that right now. Marcus is staying with us until you're ready to come home. Emma's already planning all the games they're going to play." "But the factory?" "I'm going to call your supervisor and explain what happened. If they have any issues with a medical emergency, they'll have to deal with me. And if they do fire you, which they won't, we'll figure out something else." Victoria realized she was witnessing something that her systems could never replicate, a safety net built not from institutional policies, but from genuine human relationships and community commitment. Over the next 2 days, as Elena recovered and Marcus stayed with Daniel and Emma, Victoria observed a response network that operated with remarkable efficiency despite having no formal structure. Carmen Martinez, the mother Daniel had helped with the parent portal, brought homemade meals to Elena at the hospital. Mrs. Thompson collected Marcus's homework and delivered it to Daniel's house, staying to help both children with their assignments. Mr. Walsh, the strict 5th grade teacher, stopped by to check on Marcus, and ended up playing basketball with both kids in Daniel's driveway. Dr. Foster coordinated everything through phone calls and text messages, ensuring Elena received updates about Marcus's well-being while managing the complex logistics of temporary childcare and school continuity. None of this appeared in any system Victoria had designed. The response generated no metrics, created no trackable data points, and couldn't be replicated through technology platforms. Yet it was the most effective crisis intervention Victoria had ever witnessed. When Elena returned home on Saturday morning, healthy and with a new understanding of how to manage her diabetes, she found her apartment cleaned, her refrigerator stocked with appropriate foods, and her son happy and secure after his first-ever sleepover experience. "How do I thank you all?" Elena asked Daniel as she hugged Marcus tightly. "You don't need to thank us," Daniel replied simply. "This is what community looks like. When Marcus needs something, we help. When Emma needs something, you help. That's how we take care of each other." Victoria sat in her rental car outside the Johnson apartment, watching this reunion and trying to process what she'd witnessed. Her technology platforms could track attendance, send automated notifications, and generate reports about student welfare. But they were completely incapable of creating the kind of responsive, adaptive community support that had just saved a family from potential disaster. For the first time in her career, Victoria Hartwell began to understand that the most important things happening in education couldn't be measured, systematized, or optimized through technology. They could only be built through the patient, intentional work of helping people care about each other. The moment of reckoning came on a Friday afternoon when Victoria could no longer pretend she was just observing. The situation forced her to choose between maintaining her cover as an educational consultant or revealing who she really was to help solve a crisis that her own systems had inadvertently created. It started during the weekly parent engagement meeting that Dr. Foster had invited her to observe. The meeting was designed to review how Pinnacle's communication platform was improving family involvement in school activities. Victoria expected to see positive metrics and satisfied testimonials that would validate her technology's impact. Instead, she walked into a room filled with frustrated parents, overwhelmed teachers, and a principal who was diplomatically trying to address concerns about the very systems Victoria had created. "The platform keeps sending me notifications in English even though I selected Spanish in my profile," complained Maria Santos, whose daughter was in Emma's class. "And when I try to respond to teacher messages, it says my replies are too long and gets rejected." Victoria's stomach tightened. The character limits were an intentional design feature meant to encourage concise communication and reduce administrative burden on teachers. She'd never considered how they might affect parents who needed more space to express concerns about their children. "The homework portal crashes every night between 6 and 8 p.m., added another parent, Robert Kim. "That's when all the parents are trying to help their kids, but the system can't handle the traffic. My son thinks I don't care about his assignments because I can't access them." Victoria knew about the server capacity issues. Her technical team had recommended upgrading infrastructure, but she'd postponed the expense until the next fiscal quarter to maintain profit margins. She'd never imagined that technical delays would be interpreted by children as parental indifference. Then Daniel Rivers spoke up, and Victoria felt her careful observer facade begin to crumble. "The bigger issue isn't technical problems," Daniel said quietly. "It's that the system assumes all families operate the same way. Single parents working multiple jobs can't check portals during business hours. Families without reliable internet can't access digital-only communications. Grandparents raising grandchildren often don't know how to navigate apps designed for tech-savvy millennials." Daniel paused, looking around the room at nodding heads. "We're accidentally creating a two-tier system where families with time and technology access get full information, while families dealing with poverty, language barriers, or digital illiteracy get left out." Victoria felt each word like a physical blow. Daniel was systematically dismantling the assumptions that had guided every design decision she'd made. Worse, he was doing it with specific examples she could verify in her own usage data if she'd bothered to analyze patterns of exclusion rather than just measuring overall engagement metrics. "What would you suggest instead?" Dr. Foster asked, and Victoria found herself leaning forward despite her desire to remain invisible. "Hybrid communication," Daniel replied immediately. "Keep the digital platform for families who prefer it, but maintain phone calls and paper notices for families who need them. Design the system to be inclusive rather than efficient. That would require double the administrative work, pointed out Mrs. Thompson. Not if we approach it as community building rather than administrative burden, Daniel countered. What if tech-comfortable parents were paired with families who need digital support? The parents helping with translation or navigation would build relationships across cultural and economic lines. Kids would see their families collaborating instead of competing. Victoria watched the room's energy shift as Daniel outlined a vision that transformed her efficiency-focused platform into a tool for community connection. He wasn't rejecting technology. He was reimagining how it could serve human relationships rather than replacing them. But then Daniel said something that made Victoria's blood run cold. The real question is whether the companies designing these systems actually understand the communities they're supposed to serve. Because if you've never been a single parent trying to help your child with homework after working a 12-hour shift, how can you design technology that supports that reality? The comment wasn't directed at Victoria specifically, but it hit her like a direct accusation. She realized that Daniel was describing exactly her situation, a successful executive making design decisions based on theoretical understanding rather than lived experience. Dr. Foster turned to Victoria, who had been introduced as an educational consultant conducting system evaluations. Ms. Hartwell, you've been observing our technology implementation for several weeks. What's your assessment of these concerns? Victoria felt the weight of every parent's expectant gaze. She could maintain her cover, offer generic consultant responses, and protect her position as an objective observer. Or she could acknowledge what she'd learned and risk revealing her true identity. The choice became clear when she looked at Marcus Johnson, who was coloring quietly in the corner while his mother Elena participated in her first parent meeting since the diabetes incident. Marcus was thriving because Daniel had created informal support systems that filled gaps Victoria's formal systems couldn't address. These aren't just technical issues, Victoria heard herself saying. They're design philosophy problems. The platform was created to optimize efficiency for administrators rather than accessibility for families. She paused, feeling the room's attention sharpen. The parents here are describing systematic exclusion that wasn't intentional but is very real. Any technology that makes it harder for parents to engage with their children's education is failing at its core mission. Daniel looked at her with interest, as if hearing something unexpected in her response. You sound like you have experience with educational technology design. Victoria felt the moment of truth approaching like an inevitable collision. She could deflect, maintain her deception, and continue observing from the sidelines. Or she could step into authentic engagement with the community whose lives her decisions had affected. I do have that experience, she said carefully. And I think these concerns deserve immediate attention from the system developers. How immediate? Asked Elena. Because my work schedule means I miss most school communications, and I'm worried I'm failing Marcus academically. Victoria looked at Elena's concerned face, then at Marcus's trusting expression, then at Daniel's expectant gaze. She thought about her corner office, 42 floors above Portland, her quarterly profit reports, her systematic approach to problem-solving that had built a fortune while missing the human cost of efficiency. Immediate enough that I'm going to personally contact the development team tonight, Victoria promised. These changes need to happen now, not next quarter. As the meeting concluded with specific commitments and timelines, Victoria realized she'd crossed a line that would make it impossible to return to her previous perspective. She'd stopped being an observer and become a participant in the community whose needs her technology was supposed to serve. Walking to her car after the meeting, Victoria found Daniel waiting for her in the parking lot. Ms. Hartwell, he said with a slight smile, I don't think you're just an educational consultant. Victoria felt her heart rate accelerate. What makes you say that? Because consultants recommend changes. You promised to personally implement them. That suggests you have more authority over these systems than you've been letting on. Victoria stood silent for a long moment, knowing that her response would determine whether she could continue her undercover observations or whether she'd have to reveal the truth about why she was really at Riverside Elementary. You're right, she said finally. I'm not just a consultant. Daniel nodded, as if he'd been expecting this admission. Then maybe it's time we had an honest conversation about what you're really doing here, and why it matters so much that you get this right. Victoria stood in the Riverside Elementary parking lot facing Daniel Rivers, knowing that the next few minutes would either destroy her carefully constructed observation study or transform it into something she'd never planned for. The weight of her deception felt heavier than any corporate decision she'd ever made. "My name is Victoria Hartwell," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I'm the CEO of Pinnacle Education Systems, the company that created the platforms this school uses." Daniel's expression shifted through surprise, understanding, and something that might have been disappointment. "You've been watching us for weeks without telling us who you really were." "I came here to conduct undercover observations of how our systems perform in real-world environments," Victoria continued, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "The board wanted authentic feedback without the artificial performance that comes with official corporate visits." "And what did you discover?" Daniel asked, his tone neutral but watchful. Victoria looked back at the school building, where children were boarding buses and parents were collecting their kids for weekend activities. Everything looked normal, but she now understood the invisible networks of support and communication that made this community function. Networks her technology had inadvertently disrupted. "I discovered that everything I thought I knew about educational effectiveness was wrong," she said quietly. "Your approach to solving problems, the way this community responds to crises, the actual needs of families, none of it matches the assumptions I built my systems on." Daniel crossed his arms, studying her face. "So what happens now? You go back to your boardroom and make minor adjustments to feel better about the profits?" The accusation stung because it was exactly what Victoria had planned to do 3 weeks ago. Make cosmetic improvements, generate a report about successful community engagement, and use the data to secure additional contracts with similar schools. "That was my original plan," Victoria admitted, "but I can't unsee what I've learned here. I can't pretend that efficiency metrics matter more than whether Marcus gets the support he needs or whether Elena can actually communicate with her son's teachers." "Words are easy," Daniel replied, his tone sharpening. "You've built a fortune creating systems that exclude families like ours. What would actually change?" Victoria felt the full weight of his challenge. This wasn't a business negotiation where she could rely on corporate rhetoric and strategic pivots. Daniel was demanding authentic accountability for the real-world impact of her decisions. "Everything would have to change," she said, the magnitude of her realization hitting her as she spoke. "The design philosophy, the user interface assumptions, the efficiency metrics we optimize for, all of it prioritizes administrative convenience over family accessibility." "That's still just words," Daniel pressed. "What specifically would you do differently?" Victoria took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would commit her to actions that could fundamentally alter her company's direction and profitability. "Complete redesign of the communication platform with multilingual support that actually works," she began, counting on her fingers. "Server infrastructure that can handle peak usage without crashes. Character limits eliminated for parent communications. Multiple communication channels, so families can choose what works for their situations, digital, phone, or paper." Daniel's expression remained skeptical. "Those are technical fixes. What about the underlying philosophy you mentioned?" "Community-centered design instead of efficiency-centered design," Victoria continued, feeling momentum build as she articulated ideas that had been forming throughout her weeks of observation. "Instead of measuring success through reduced administrative burden, we measure it through increased family engagement across all demographic groups." "And how would you measure that without creating new systems that burden families?" Victoria paused, recognizing the trap in his question. Any measurement system could become another barrier if designed poorly. "We'd have to ask families directly. Regular community meetings like today's, but focused on whether the technology is actually serving their needs rather than just collecting data about their usage." "That would require ongoing relationship building rather than just software deployment," Daniel pointed out. "Your company would need staff who understand the communities they're serving, not just the technical capabilities they're delivering." "Yes," Victoria agreed, understanding the full implication. "We'd need community liaisons in every district. People who know the families personally and can advocate for their needs during product development." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of children play on the playground equipment while their parents chatted nearby. "You realize what you're describing would completely change your business model," he said finally. "I know," Victoria replied. "Higher costs, longer development cycles, smaller profit margins. but also systems that actually serve the people they're supposed to help. Your board would never approve that kind of fundamental change. Victoria felt a familiar cold certainty settle in her chest, the same feeling she'd had when she decided to leave McKinsey to start her own company, when she'd bet everything on her vision of educational technology despite the risks. "Then I'll have to convince them," she said. "Or if I can't convince them, I'll have to make different choices about my role in the company." Daniel turned to look at her directly, his expression serious. "You'd really risk your position over what you've seen here?" "Daniel, I've spent the last 3 weeks watching you solve problems that my million-dollar systems couldn't address. You've shown me that the most important work in education happens through relationships and community support that technology should enhance, not replace." Victoria gestured toward the school building. "Marcus is thriving because you created informal support networks. Emma's confidence returned because you understood her learning style better than any algorithm could. Elena feels connected to her son's education because people took time to help her navigate barriers my system created. So I've built my career on the belief that better systems create better outcomes. But you've proven that better relationships create better outcomes. And systems should serve those relationships rather than substituting for them." Daniel's expression began to soften slightly. "That's a fundamental philosophical shift." "It is. And it means acknowledging that I've been optimizing for the wrong variables while telling myself I was helping people." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the normal rhythms of school dismissal around them. Victoria realized this was the first conversation about her work that had felt genuinely meaningful in years. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said eventually. "Of course. Why does this matter to you personally? I mean, you could maintain the status quo and keep making profits. Why take the risk of changing everything?" Victoria thought about her childhood above her grandmother's store, her mother's harsh lessons about efficiency over emotion, the systematic approach to life that had brought her success but left her isolated from authentic human connection. "Because I grew up believing that practical solutions were more important than emotional needs," she said slowly. "I built systems that reflected that belief, and I told myself I was helping people by bringing order to chaos. And now? Now I've seen what happens when someone prioritizes understanding people's emotional needs as the foundation for practical solutions. Your approach doesn't choose between efficiency and humanity. It achieves better results by putting humanity first." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "So what's your next step?" Victoria looked back at Riverside Elementary, thinking about the board meeting scheduled for Monday morning, the quarterly reports that emphasized profit margins over community impact, the fundamental changes she would need to advocate for despite the financial risks. "I'm going to tell my board exactly what I've learned here," she said. "And I'm going to propose that we restructure our entire approach to serve communities rather than just optimizing administrative processes." "And if they say no?" Victoria felt the weight of a decision that would define not just her career but her understanding of what kind of leader she wanted to be. "Then I'll have to decide whether I want to be CEO of a company that perpetuates problems or find another way to contribute to solutions." The Pinnacle Education Systems boardroom felt different when Victoria walked in Monday morning. The sleek conference table, floor-to-ceiling windows, and minimalist aesthetic that had once represented sophisticated success now seemed cold and disconnected from the vibrant community she'd spent 3 weeks observing at Riverside Elementary. 12 board members sat around the polished table, tablets open to quarterly reports showing strong revenue growth and expanding market penetration. Victoria had built this company with these people, shared countless strategic decisions that had transformed Pinnacle into an industry leader. Now she was about to propose changes that would challenge everything they'd accomplished together. "Victoria, excellent timing," said board chair Margaret Chen, a venture capitalist who'd been with Pinnacle since the early funding rounds. "We're eager to hear about the Undercover school visits. The data suggests our systems are performing exceptionally well in target demographics." Victoria placed her folder on the table but didn't open it. The presentation she'd originally prepared, full of user satisfaction metrics and efficiency improvements, felt irrelevant after what she'd witnessed at Riverside Elementary. "The data tells only part of the story," Victoria began. "I need to share some observations that don't appear in our standard performance metrics." She clicked to her first slide, a photo of the parent engagement meeting where frustrated families had described barriers her systems created. This is what successful implementation actually looks like in our target communities. The board members leaned forward, studying the image of parents, teachers, and administrators engaged in heated discussion around a conference table. "Those parents look upset," observed CFO Richard Sterling. "Are they complaining about technical issues? We can address software bugs quickly." "They're not complaining about bugs," Victoria replied. "They're describing systematic exclusion from their children's education caused by our design assumptions." Victoria spent the next 20 minutes detailing specific examples she'd documented. Elena's inability to communicate with teachers due to language barriers in the interface, server crashes during peak usage hours when working parents tried to help with homework, character limits that prevented detailed discussions about children's needs. "These sound like edge cases," said board member Dr. Patricia Hawkins, who oversaw product development. "Our user satisfaction scores average 4.7 out of 5 across all implementations." "The families who can't effectively use our systems aren't completing satisfaction surveys," Victoria pointed out. "We're measuring satisfaction among users who already have the resources and digital literacy to navigate our platform successfully." She clicked to her next slide, a chart showing usage patterns by demographic categories. "Look at the engagement data more carefully. Families with higher incomes and education levels use our systems extensively. Families dealing with poverty, language barriers, or limited technology access show minimal engagement." "That's a socioeconomic issue, not a technology problem," argued Richard. "We can't solve inequality through software design." "But we can avoid making inequality worse," Victoria countered. "Right now, our systems inadvertently create two-tier access to educational information. Families with advantages get comprehensive engagement tools. Families facing challenges get locked out of crucial communications about their children's progress." The room fell silent as board members processed the implications. These were smart, well-intentioned people who genuinely believed technology could improve educational outcomes. Victoria knew they'd never deliberately designed systems to exclude vulnerable families. "What are you proposing?" asked Margaret, her tone cautious. Victoria took a deep breath, knowing her next words would either transform Pinnacle's direction or end her tenure as CEO. "Complete philosophical restructuring," she said. "Instead of optimizing for administrative efficiency, we optimize for inclusive family engagement. Instead of measuring success through reduced costs for schools, we measure it through increased participation across all demographic groups." "That sounds expensive," Richard observed. "It is expensive," Victoria agreed. "Multilingual interfaces that actually work. Server infrastructure that handles peak demand. Community liaisons in every district. Design processes that include families from our target communities, rather than just education administrators." Dr. Hawkins frowned at her tablet. "Those changes would increase our development costs by at least 40%, while reducing the efficiency gains that schools value most. How do we maintain profitability?" "We change what we're selling," Victoria replied. "Instead of selling administrative efficiency, we sell community engagement. Instead of reducing staff workload, we enhance family connection to education." "That's a completely different value proposition," pointed out board member James Wu, who handled marketing strategy. "Schools purchase our systems to streamline operations and reduce costs. You're describing a social service platform." "I'm describing what families actually need," Victoria said, feeling her convictions strengthen. "And what communities like Riverside Elementary have taught me is that authentic family engagement produces better educational outcomes than administrative efficiency." Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying Victoria carefully. "These observations seem to have affected you personally. Are you sure you're maintaining objective business judgment?" The question hit Victoria like a challenge to her professional competence. 3 weeks ago, she would have interpreted emotional investment as compromised decision-making. Now she understood it as essential information. "My judgment has never been more clear," Victoria replied. "I've spent 3 weeks watching a single father solve problems that our million-dollar systems couldn't address. His approach consistently produced better outcomes for children and families because he prioritized relationships over efficiency." "One parent's creative solutions don't constitute a scalable business model," Richard argued. "But his principles do," Victoria countered. "Understanding individual needs, building community connections, adapting systems to serve people rather than forcing people to adapt to systems. Those principles could guide how we design technology for every community we serve. Dr. Hawkins pulled up financial projections on her tablet. Even if your philosophical approach is admirable, the economic reality is challenging. Higher development costs, longer implementation timelines, more complex maintenance requirements, all of that reduces our competitive advantage. Our competitive advantage should be systems that actually work for the families they're supposed to serve, Victoria said. Right now, we're competing to create the most efficient administrative tools. I'm proposing we compete to create the most inclusive engagement platforms. And if schools prefer administrative efficiency over inclusive engagement, asked James. Victoria felt the weight of everything she'd learned at Riverside Elementary. Then we help them understand why inclusive engagement produces better educational outcomes than administrative efficiency. Margaret looked around the table at her fellow board members, reading their expressions. Victoria, what you're describing represents fundamental changes to our business model, target market, and value proposition. Changes this significant typically require extensive market research and gradual implementation. Market research means spending months studying problems I've already observed directly, Victoria replied. And gradual implementation means continuing to exclude families who need support while we debate optimal strategies. So you're recommending immediate, comprehensive changes based on 3 weeks of observation at one school? Richard's tone carried obvious skepticism. Victoria stood up, walking to the window that overlooked downtown Portland. Somewhere out there, Elena Johnson was probably struggling to navigate parent portals during her lunch break. Marcus was hopefully thriving with the support networks Daniel had created. Emma was using her technological skills to help older students with their digital projects. I'm recommending that we acknowledge the gap between our intentions and our impact, Victoria said, turning back to face the board. I'm recommending that we prioritize serving the communities we claim to help over maximizing profits from administrative efficiency. And if the board isn't ready to make those changes? Margaret asked quietly. Victoria felt the question settle in her chest like a stone. She thought about her corner office, her financial security, the company she'd built from nothing. Then she thought about Daniel Rivers' willingness to risk everything to help a child he barely knew, about Elena's gratitude for community support, about Marcus's trust in adults who prioritized his well-being over their convenience. Then I'll need to consider whether I can continue leading a company whose values no longer align with what I've learned about effective leadership, Victoria said. The boardroom fell completely silent. Victoria had just threatened to resign rather than compromise on principles she'd developed through 3 weeks of observation at an elementary school. Margaret Chen looked at her for a long moment, then at the financial projections still displayed on the wall screen, then back at Victoria. I think, Margaret said slowly, we need to schedule some site visits of our own. 2 weeks after Victoria's boardroom confrontation, Margaret Chen found herself sitting in Daniel Rivers' living room on a Saturday morning, watching Emma teach 3 other children how to create stop-motion animation videos on a laptop while Daniel prepared pancakes in the kitchen. It wasn't the kind of market research venue Margaret was accustomed to, but Victoria had insisted the board needed to understand the communities they served before making decisions about Pinnacle's future direction. This feels very informal for strategic planning, Margaret had whispered to Victoria when they arrived at Daniel's modest 2-bedroom house in the Riverside neighborhood. That's exactly the point, Victoria had replied. The most important conversations about education happen in kitchens and living rooms, not conference rooms. Margaret watched Emma patiently explain video editing techniques to Marcus Johnson, whose mother Elena sat nearby grading papers from her night school classes. Carmen Martinez was helping her son Miguel with a science project at the dining table, while her younger daughter played with building blocks on the floor. 3 other Riverside Elementary families had gathered for what Daniel called a, quote, community breakfast, though Margaret suspected Victoria had orchestrated the informal focus group. The thing about the Pinnacle system, Elena was explaining to Margaret while keeping one eye on Marcus's progress with the animation software, is that it assumes I have time to sit down and navigate through multiple screens to find information about my son's day. Elena paused to help Marcus adjust the laptop angle, then continued. When I get home from my shift at 11 p.m., I need to know immediately if Marcus had a good day, if there were any problems, if he has homework I should help with. The system makes me click through attendance reports, behavior logs, and assignment portals to piece together basic information. What would work better? Margaret asked, genuinely curious despite her initial skepticism about conducting board research in someone's living room. A simple daily summary. Elena replied without hesitation. One message that tells me, Marcus had a great day, participated actively in math class, forgot his lunch money but the teacher helped him, and has reading homework pages 34 to 36. Everything I need to know to connect with my son about his school experience. Carmen looked up from helping Miguel with his volcano model. And it should come as a text message, not just through the app. When you're working 2 jobs, you can't always remember to check apps, but you always see text messages. Margaret made notes on her tablet, realizing these weren't the technological requests she'd expected. The parents weren't asking for more features or advanced capabilities. They wanted simpler, more accessible communication that fit into their actual daily routines. Daniel emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate of pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, which immediately drew enthusiastic approval from the children. The technology should adapt to families' lives, he said, setting the plate on the coffee table, not force families to adapt to the technology's limitations. But surely you appreciate the efficiency improvements our systems provide for schools, Margaret said, accepting a cup of coffee from Daniel. Teachers spend less time on administrative tasks and more time on instruction. Teachers spend less time on administrative communication, Daniel corrected gently. But they spend more time troubleshooting technology problems and helping families navigate digital barriers. The efficiency gains for administrators become additional burdens for teachers and families. Margaret watched Mrs. Thompson, who had joined the gathering after stopping by to drop off some books for the children. Is that accurate from your perspective as an educator? Mrs. Thompson nodded while helping Emma solve a technical problem with the animation software. The communication platform saves me from making phone calls, but I end up spending just as much time helping parents who can't access the digital information. And I've lost the personal connection that came from actually talking to families about their children. Personal connection seems to be a recurring theme, Margaret observed. But surely digital communication is more efficient than individual phone calls for routine information sharing. Efficient for whom? Asked Daniel, settling into his chair with his own coffee. The system is efficient for administrators who need to broadcast information quickly. But it's inefficient for families who need to understand how that information affects their specific child's educational experience. Margaret found herself thinking about her own children's school experience. Her family had the resources and technological sophistication to navigate any digital platform easily. She'd never considered how different the experience might be for families facing economic stress, language barriers, or limited technology access. What would an ideal communication system look like? She asked the group. The conversation that followed was unlike any product development meeting Margaret had ever attended. Instead of feature specifications and technical requirements, the families described communication needs in terms of relationships, emotional support, and community building. Elena wanted to feel connected to Marcus's daily school experience despite her demanding work schedule. Carmen needed bilingual support that went beyond machine translation to include cultural context. Miguel's science teacher needed ways to share his enthusiasm for learning with families who might feel intimidated by academic subjects they hadn't studied themselves. The technology should help us build relationships, Daniel summarized, not replace them with automated efficiency. As the morning progressed, Margaret watched the children collaborate on their animation project, while adults discussed everything from homework policies to community fundraising strategies. The conversation flowed naturally between educational topics and broader community concerns, with no clear boundaries between school issues and family life. "This is what we're actually serving," Victoria said quietly to Margaret as they watched Emma teach Marcus how to adjust lighting for better video quality. Not just school administrators or individual families, but entire communities where children's education affects everyone. Margaret realized she was witnessing something that didn't appear in any market research report or user satisfaction survey. These families weren't just customers purchasing educational technology services. They were members of an interconnected community where children's success depended on adults' ability to support each other. "The business model implications are significant," Margaret murmured to Victoria. "I know. We'd need to fundamentally restructure how we design, implement, and support our systems. And the financial projections? Higher upfront costs, longer development cycles, more complex customer relationships. But also deeper community integration and more sustainable long-term adoption." Margaret watched Daniel help Carmen translate a complex science concept into Spanish so she could better support Miguel's project, while Elena shared tips for managing work schedules around school events. These weren't just individual families trying to navigate educational requirements. This was a support network that made children's academic success possible. They're solving collectively what our systems expect them to handle individually, Margaret realized. Exactly. And our technology could enhance their collective problem-solving, instead of forcing them into isolated interactions with digital interfaces. As the community breakfast concluded and families began to gather their children and belongings, Margaret felt the weight of decisions that would affect not just Pinnacle's profitability, but communities like this one across the country. "Victoria," she said as they walked to their cars, "I understand now why you were willing to risk your position over these changes." And Margaret looked back at Daniel's house, where children's laughter still echoed from the backyard and parents were making plans for next week's mutual support activities. "I think we need to call an emergency board meeting, because what we've built isn't serving what actually matters to the communities we're supposed to help. Are you ready to support fundamental changes?" Margaret thought about her own comfortable distance from the daily struggles these families navigated, her assumption that efficient systems automatically created better outcomes, her company's focus on administrative metrics rather than community impact. "I'm ready to learn what it means to put families first and technology second," she said finally, "even if it means rebuilding everything we've created." The transformation was beginning, but Margaret understood it would require more than policy changes or product updates. It would require admitting that success measured in profit margins had blinded them to failure measured in human impact, and that the real innovation wouldn't come from better technology, but from better understanding of the communities they claimed to serve. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the newly renovated Pinnacle Community Engagement Center, a space that would have been unimaginable when she first walked into Riverside Elementary as an undercover CEO. The center occupied the entire second floor of a converted warehouse in the Riverside neighborhood, deliberately located in the community it served, rather than in a corporate tower downtown. The space buzzed with activity that defied traditional business categories. Families worked alongside Pinnacle employees at roundtables designed for collaboration rather than presentation. Children played in a dedicated area while their parents participated in technology design sessions. Bilingual staff members facilitated conversations between software developers and parents who had never seen a coding interface but understood exactly what their families needed from educational technology. "This feels like a community center, not a corporate office," observed Dr. Patricia Hawkins, who had initially been the most skeptical board member about Victoria's proposed changes. She was watching Elena Johnson demonstrate the new daily communication system to a group of parents from 3 different school districts. "That's intentional," Victoria replied, noting how naturally Elena had assumed a leadership role in helping other families navigate technology designed around their actual needs. "We discovered that the best product feedback comes from informal community conversations, not formal user testing sessions." The transformation hadn't been easy. 3 board members had resigned when Victoria implemented community-centered design processes that prioritized relationship building over rapid deployment. Development costs had increased by 60% as Pinnacle hired community liaisons, expanded multilingual support, and rebuilt platforms around accessibility rather than efficiency. Most challenging had been changing internal corporate culture. Engineers accustomed to optimizing for administrative metrics had to learn to measure success through family engagement across demographic categories. Sales teams had to shift from promoting cost savings to demonstrating community impact. Customer service evolved into ongoing relationship management that required understanding local contexts rather than just resolving technical issues. The financial transition was brutal. CFO Richard Sterling admitted, joining Victoria and Dr. Hawkins near the family demonstration area. "Revenue dropped 28% in the first quarter when we restructured pricing to accommodate community-based implementation rather than individual school contracts." "But look at the retention numbers," Victoria pointed out, gesturing toward a wall display showing long-term adoption metrics. "Schools using our community-centered platforms show 96% renewal rates compared to 78% for our traditional efficiency-focused systems." More importantly, the impact data told stories that Victoria had never been able to capture through her previous measurement approaches. Parent engagement had increased an average of 340% in districts using the redesigned platforms. Student academic performance showed statistically significant improvements, particularly among families facing economic challenges. Teacher satisfaction surveys revealed that community-supported technology implementation reduced burnout while increasing job satisfaction. The most compelling evidence is qualitative, said Dr. Hawkins, watching Marcus Johnson help a younger child navigate homework submission features while their parents discuss strategies for supporting learning at home. These families aren't just using our technology, they're becoming stakeholders in their children's educational communities. Daniel Rivers approached their group, carrying his laptop and wearing the badge that identified him as Pinnacle's first Director of Community Innovation, a position Victoria had created specifically to ensure that product development remained grounded in authentic family experiences. "How's the cross-district collaboration session going?" Victoria asked. "Incredibly well," Daniel replied, his enthusiasm evident. Parents from urban, suburban, and rural schools are finding that their communication needs are remarkably similar, despite different demographic contexts. Language barriers, work schedule conflicts, technology access limitations, the core challenges are universal. Daniel opened his laptop to show real-time feedback from the afternoon's design session. "What's exciting is watching families realize they're experts in their own educational needs. They don't need technology specialists to tell them what would work better. They need specialists to help them translate their insights into functional systems." "That's a fundamental shift in how we approach product development," Dr. Hawkins observed. "Instead of creating solutions for communities, we're creating solutions with communities." "And the business results validate the philosophical changes," added Richard, consulting his tablet. "Customer acquisition costs have decreased because community design systems generate organic referrals. Implementation timelines have shortened because families help each other adapt to new platforms. Support costs have dropped because users become mutual resources rather than individual help desk clients." Victoria watched Emma Rivers lead a group of younger children in creating tutorial videos for new students joining their school's communication platform. Emma's confidence had blossomed over the past 6 months as she'd become a bridge between adult technology concerns and child user experiences. "The ripple effects extend beyond our business metrics," Victoria noted. "Schools report improved family engagement across all aspects of education, not just technology adoption. Communities are developing stronger internal support networks. Children are seeing their parents as valued contributors to their educational experiences." Carmen Martinez joined their conversation, carrying notes from the parent feedback session she'd just facilitated in Spanish. As Pinnacle's community liaison coordinator, Carmen had become essential to ensuring that platform development included perspectives from families across cultural and linguistic backgrounds. "The families are requesting expansion of the peer support features," Carmen reported. "They want technology that helps them connect with each other around shared challenges, not just receive information from schools." "Social networking for educational communities," Daniel mused. "Parents helping parents, with technology facilitating relationships rather than replacing them." "That represents our next phase of development," Victoria said, feeling the excitement that came with solving problems that mattered to real people, moving beyond communication efficiency to community-building platforms. The transformation had required Victoria to confront uncomfortable truths about her previous approach to business leadership. Her data-driven efficiency model had been successful in traditional corporate metrics, while failing to serve the human communities those metrics were supposed to represent. "I've been thinking about measurement differently," Victoria told the group. "Instead of asking whether our systems reduce administrative burden, we ask whether they increase family connection to education. Instead of optimizing for user engagement with our platforms, we optimize for community engagement with children's learning." "And professionally?" asked Dr. Hawkins. "How has this changed your understanding of business leadership?" Victoria looked around the community center, watching families and Pinnacle employees collaborate on solutions that none of them could have developed independently. Children played while their parents contributed expertise to product development. Staff members learned about community needs while sharing technical capabilities. "I used to believe that effective leadership meant creating systems that worked regardless of individual differences," Victoria said. "Now I understand that effective leadership means creating systems that work because they're designed around individual differences." "That's a profound philosophical shift," Richard observed. "It's also a sustainable business model," Victoria added. When communities become partners in developing solutions to their own challenges, they become invested in those solutions. Success. Customer loyalty isn't just about satisfaction with services. It's about ownership of collaborative problem-solving. As the afternoon session concluded and families began preparing to leave, Victoria felt the deep satisfaction that came from work aligned with values. Pinnacle's financial performance had eventually exceeded previous levels, but more importantly, the company was contributing to educational outcomes that supported community thriving rather than just administrative efficiency. "What's next?" asked Daniel as they watched families exchange contact information and make plans for continued collaboration between formal meetings. "National expansion," Victoria replied. "But community by community, relationship by relationship. We've learned that sustainable technology adoption happens through local networks, not corporate deployment strategies." Victoria thought about her journey from the corporate tower's 42nd floor to this converted warehouse space where authentic leadership meant listening more than directing, learning more than teaching, and building relationships more than optimizing systems. Sometimes the most profound transformation comes from discovering that everything you thought you knew about success was only half the story. The other half was written in community centers and family kitchens, in the patient work of people like Daniel Rivers, who understood that the most important innovations serve human flourishing rather than corporate efficiency. And sometimes, if you're fortunate enough to recognize wisdom when you encounter it, you get the chance to rebuild your life's work around what actually matters. The real victory wasn't changing a business model. It was discovering what it meant to lead in service of something larger than profit margins or personal achievement. It was learning to measure success by the quality of communities you help create rather than the efficiency of systems you impose upon them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.